Hey everyone. Doing a little voiceover this morning for league I ran last night. So I had run the league originally just straight recording to YouTube, and the audio cut out like halfway through, as of course it does. So I'm going back through, going over the matches, going over what I was thinking at the time, just to kind of show a little bit about the deck. We played almost probably like 71 of the 75 on stream a couple times now at twitch.tv/the_control freak. And I think we went like 4-1, 4-1. So it seemed like the trophy was right at the doorstep there. Glad we were able to finally get across that hurdle. So let's just go over it a little bit. So deck list here. It's a base inspired by Aspiring Spike, who presented this list that had like the 4 Murktide, 4 Street Wraith, 4 Archmage's Charm, 4 Counterspell, 4 Shadow, 4 Fatal Push, 4 Thoughtseize, 4 Drown in the Lock. His initial list did have 4 copies of Tainted Indulgence, this uncommon from New Capenna that basically lets you like draw 2, and then if you don't have 5 different CMCs in your graveyard, you discard 1. We ran a league with the Indulgence, went 4-1 with it, but the card was basically always 2 mana, draw 2, discard 1. I don't think I ever cast it with 5 different CMCs in my graveyard. So I decided, like, I'll go a little bit more consistency, swap out 2 of the Indulgences for 2 Night's Whisper, just to get the slightly more guaranteed 2 mana draw 2. And then the other 2 spots became a copy of Brazen Borrower for this league. It has been something else. And 18th Land. I also cut the Seagate Restoration for another land. The Seagate was good as an additional CMC with the Tainted Indulgence, but without the Indulgence, wasn't really serving a big purpose. We've got the Night's Whispers in there now to help lose the life a little bit more aggressively for Shadow if we need to. So at the end of the day, it seemed like a card I was pretty happy to cut just for another land. On the sideboard, the only changes we made is Spike had 4 copies of Dauthi Voidwalker. I cut the Dauthi when I went to Blue-Red to try out Temur Battle Rage. Since I was cutting down a black source, I didn't want like 4 double black cards on my board. And I just kept finding that the matchups that I wanted that Grave Hate against were matchups that had a good bit of ways to interact with Dauthi. So I ended up cutting the Dauthis for 3 copies of Soul Guide Lantern and 1 copy of Blood Chief's Thirst. Just as an additional piece of spot removal on the sideboard. And then the last cut was the 2 copies of Kaido. I cut for 2 copies of Spreading Seas. A little extra hate against like Urza Saga decks, as well as Tron, Eldrazi Tron, whatever, greedy mana bases. But I was just like looking for something in that spot. I don't think Spreading Seas is going to be like the best answer long term. I just wanted something there to try out that I hadn't really tried out before. So without further ado, let's go ahead and jump in to showcase the matches. Alright, so first match here. Win the die roll. It's always a good start in Modern. I know we've talked about it a little bit before, how huge of a disparity there is between being on the play and the draw in Modern. So anytime you get to win die rolls and be the first to make actions, you've got a huge advantage. So open up a hand. Double Murktide's a little awkward, but we've got Thoughtseize, a couple fetches, Shadow, Fatal Push. So we're looking at like Turn 1, fetch shock Thoughtseize. Turn 2, fetch shock, have a shadow, plus have fatal push. So a decent bit of interaction. That also gives us 4 cards in the yard for Murktide. So if, like, say we turn 1, fetch shock Thoughtseize, turn 2, fetch shock shadow, fatal push something, they kill our shadow. Now we just have the mana to play out a 5/5 Murktide. So I think this is going to be a not super easy keep because of the double Murktide, but I think a solid hand. Plus, for our opponents on like a Thoughtseize deck or something, and they take one of our Murktides, then having the backup is relevant. So, blue-white control. What I'm thinking about with this hand, the Prismatic Ending does just like straight up answer the shadow. With the Solitude in hand, I can't deploy double threats, because if they just like Solitude my Murktide, it's going to kill my shadow. Counterspell is good for Murktide, but I can get under Counterspell with a shadow. So it kind of comes down to, am I okay with them answering my first threat? Like if I play out the shadow, they Prismatic Ending it, and I find myself like another piece of hand disruption or Counterspell or something, am I okay relying on Murktide into Solitude? And ultimately I decide, like, I'm just going to take the risk of getting down Shadow under Counterspell, not let them Prismatic Ending it. So we'll go ahead and like keep up with this like we would a live match. So Colonnade down, Counterspell's a really good pickup. So if they like didn't find an answer to the shadow this turn, then I might be able to just hold up Counterspell. Or maybe even like Counterspell a Solitude. But they do have their own Counterspell. So Archmage's Charm I would like a few more lands for, but what can you do? So now the idea is like, I'm looking for something along the lines of like a little Teferi that I can counter, a Chalice of the Void, just anything that I can put this Counterspell on. Because like this draw go game does not favor me with a 1/1 Death Shadow. Drawing second Fatal Push here is really bad against a deck that's like not doing anything to play to the board. I'm under the assumption here that my opponent cast this dress down thinking that it would kill my shadow. Like, since Shadow's power and toughness are dependent on life total, perhaps they thought it was like Scourge of the Skyclaves, where they play the dress down, it loses the ability to determine its life total, or to determine your life total, and just dies. But Death Shadow is not that way, because Death Shadow is, at its base, a 13/13. So all it's going to lose is the ability to get -X/-X, where X is your life total. So this dress down just became like a +10/+10 pump spell on my shadow. But I guess I get to draw a card, so they could have been looking for an extra white card for Solitude, but I think if that's the case, like, just take the 3 off the shadow and Solitude later. Alright, so here I know they have the counter spell, but I need to get cards out of their hand. So counter spell or not, like, need to go for it. Important decision point here. I can play out the Murktide as a 5/5 and just like have a dude on board. But if they just go 5th land, hard cast Solitude, like, I lose everything. I don't have a threat. I can't deal with the Solitude. Like, everything kind of goes straight out the window there. And if I'm tapped down to 1 mana, there's like no real reason for them to pass the turn and let me untap with counter magic, since they already know that I have counter spell. So instead, we're just gonna try to refuel our hand a little bit, which opponent just puts in their Solitude here. And I'm ecstatic about this, because even though Solitude is an actual magic card, if it's just sitting on the battlefield, I'm way happier than if it's exiling one of my dudes. Alright, so 1 Solitude down. I feel like if they are just hard casting this Solitude, they probably have a backup one. But at the end of the day, like, I don't really have a lot of good answers. So I decided to play out I could dress down or drown and lock this, but then they just have Vantress active, and I really don't want to give them a bunch of extra draws with Vantress. I make this Murktide a 4/4 intentionally. So I could have made it up to a 6/6, but a 4/4 presents lethal, and it incentivizes them to like fire up Colonnade at some point to either try to block or attack into the Murktide. And I want to make these fatal pushes live. Plus, if they're able to answer this one, then I've got more spells in my yard to make the next Murktide even better. So this is like a Murktide that's good enough, but isn't destroying like all of my resources here. But they draw and scoop. And I don't know what the reasoning is. Like, I'm assuming they've got nothing in hand, but they do just have a Solitude, so they could like attack into the Murktide. I block and they buy themselves another turn. My best line would be like finding a land so that I could play a land, like play a Night's Whisper or something, hold up Drown in the Loch. But either way, doesn't work out that way. So we are on to game number 2. Let's see. Alright, so sideboarding against blue-white control. Let's pull out the list here. Some of the big considerations to make are things like removal spells, obviously pretty dead. I don't want to bring in or keep in removal spells just for Celestial Colonnade or like the Storm Giant land. So those are pretty easy first cuts. From there, I'm looking at like how live is Dress Down. It stops Solitude, but like I'm not really going for combo kills here with Shadow. The Murktide Regent slot, if they're running Rest in Peace, then Murktide's really bad. If they answer the first Murktide, if they have like a Path to Exile, to Fairy bounce, Jace bounce something, they get rid of the first Murktide, then that kind of makes the second one really dead. So that's something to keep in mind. Out of the board, Stubborn Denial is fantastic. The Mystical Disputes are really good. The last spots could be like Soul Guide Lantern if you expect Snapcaster Mage. Could board in Spreading Seas since we saw like the Castle Vantress. They probably have Castle Ardenvale. Something like that. I usually don't like the idea of just cut and dry, board these in, board these out, because it's all relative. But you see, like, took out the Fatal Pushes. It looks like I kept in the Dismember. Boarded in the 2 Mystical Disputes, the Stubborn Denial, one of the Spreading Seas. So, I'm a really big advocate of just, like, stay flexible with your sideboarding. Like, if something feels a little bit better that game, go with it. If it doesn't feel so good that game, don't go with it. But as soon as you start going with a cut and dry sideboard guide of like, hey, against blue-white control, I bring in X, Y, Z, I cut A, B, C. Well, now all of a sudden, if something is slightly different, like what if this blue-white control player had 2 copies of Urza Saga in their deck, and I'm not like boarding in all my spreading C's, or I'm boarding out dress downs in the matchup. Like, if I'm going off a strict sideboard guide, I'm just saying, like, yeah, those are coming out, but maybe it's not the right choice. Alright, so game 2 on the draw. Very reactive hand, but overall, like, really strong hand. We've got a lot of redraw power. We've got good counter spells. Hand is pretty rough against like turn 2 Chalice of the Void or Rest in Peace. A little more so against Rest in Peace. Or a little more dead against Rest in Peace. A little more live against Chalice of the Void. So this is like Moment of Truth. They did not have a Rest in Peace or Chalice of the Void. So now we're not sitting pretty, but we've got a lot of room to give. And we'll just start like cracking some fetches, try to find a threat. I decide to shock once and let the other come in tapped here. I don't have a shadow. I've got fetch land Night's Whisper to lower my life total more if I do find a shadow. But I don't want to be cutting off like Night's Whispers and Street Wraiths as potential draws going forward. So I don't want to just like aggressively fetch shock with no reason, because I want to make sure that like thought seizes and things are live going into the late game. And if you're too low on life total, then that late game thought seize that could take a solitude is all of a sudden like a liable card for you. So opponent goes for an Archmage's Charm here. I considered letting this resolve for a while, but at the end of it, I decided that like I've got so much good counter magic in my hand that I just like don't want to let my opponent get up on cards. Like I can 1-for-1 answer everything they've got going on. But if they start like double spelling and stuff like that, I'm going to be in some trouble. So really wanted to draw a land there. However, we do not. So now it's up to like, does our opponent cast something we care about? In this case, yeah. Want to keep my Archmage's Charm so that I can draw some more. But Teferi would have wrecked like our entire game plan, so we got to counter that. Hitting the 4th land's really great. Now we've got like double counter spell up with the Drowns and actual counter spell. Alright, so like my thought process here is my opponent missed a land drop. They've played an Archmage's Charm to draw 2, a Teferi. I'm assuming the rest of their hand is just like counter spells and removal spells. And typically in like the blue-white or control mirrors, like you don't really want to be countering draw spells. You want to counter like payoffs and things. I'm countering the draw spell because I'm not the late game control deck. Like I don't have the big Teferis and Castle Vantress and Shark Typhoon or whatever to draw to. So like I need to get the game over with, and the more cards I let my opponent see, the less likely I am for that to happen. So on my side, I'm all for countering some number of draw spells. And yeah, so 100% just like I thought. Removal spells, counter spells. So counterspell itself isn't that scary because I've got 50 ways to fight over that in hand. Prismatic Ending and Solitude kind of along the same lines, but Supreme Verdict is the one that like I can't counter, I can't do anything about. And we just Wraith into another Thoughtseize, so we're going to get another card out of hand, end up taking the Solitude because like I don't want to play out a Shadow and them just be able to like pitch Prismatic Ending to Solitude. Maybe they draw another counter spell and we get into like a big counter war. And this is what I was talking about with not aggressively fetch shocking earlier. So like I'm at 9 life, I'm at a functional 6 with my 3 fetches, functional 4 with the Night's Whisper. Like if I had fetch shocked earlier, then I'm going down to 2. And like if I find another Thoughtseize or Street Wraith, it's just dead. So we know our opponent has got Prismatic Ending, Counterspell, Unknown. And we just need to find a threat. So important to note that this Flooded Strand cannot get a mana source. Alright. So opponent found an opt. They decided to go for that. I decided to let it resolve, which could be a bad decision. But my thought process here is I think most of the things they want to find, I've got good answers for. Like if they find a Teferi, a Solitude, Prismatic Ending, something like that. The likelihood of them finding a second Supreme Verdict is a little low right here. So I just figure I've got like good answers to whatever they're going to find off this opt. Except they find a Castle Vantress. And so now I'm in a bit of trouble. Like I've got good answers. I can answer on a 1-for-1 basis. But I need to find a threat to close out the game. If I don't find a threat, then I'm just like sitting around not doing anything. And they're going to Vantress me out of the game. So, dress down on the second main phase here. Important because if I draw a Murktide and I dress down to end of turn, the Murktide would not enter with the +1/+1 counters on it. And I really want the Murktide to enter with the +1/+1 counters. So we let this go into turn. And now I've got like this Thoughtseize that I could cast, but I really want to find a threat more than I want to hit their hand. Thankfully we find a Shadow. So now we've got a Shadow backed up by every bit of counter magic known to man. We just need to dodge Supreme Verdict. But it is interesting in like this build of Shadow. We've gone through 31 cards now and only seen one threat. So we would not like that to resolve. I want to use these Drown in the Locks more aggressively than like the Counterspell and the Mystical Dispute in case my opponent does find something like a Rest in Peace. But I will absolutely Mystical Dispute a big Teferi if given the chance. So fetching to go to 1 doesn't accomplish anything for me. It's not changing the clock. I don't really want my opponent to know I've got 1 or no more lands. Doesn't really matter, but... So now I know they've got 2 cards, this Archmage's Charm and 1 unknown. I've got 75 counter spells. Yeah, you can Dovin's Veto, you can do whatever. We've got a Shadow that's going to kill you. Cool beans. On to match number 2. Alright. Match numero dos. Unfortunately, we lose this die roll, so already at a huge disadvantage. Opening hand, few lands, counterspell, stub, drown in the lock. Opponent reveals Giganta, so could be Tron, could be a like Grixis Shadow matchup. I'm sure there's mono red decks with Giganta still, so not a whole lot of information to gain off that. But I think we're going to keep this. We've got like a good removal spell if they play a 1-drop with a fetch land. We've got counter spells. We've got redraws to help find a threat. So this isn't like your traditional Jund Shadow hand where you need to have like threat, hand disruption. This is way more of like a I want to get to turn 10, play out a Murktide with triple counter back up and go from there kind of deck. So here we're just hoping to like get a chance to soft stub something. Unfortunately, cannot soft stub that. So we see Oval Chase Daredevil here, which gives away that this is Aspiring Spikes, blue-black, Asmo, Time Sieve deck. Just looking to like make a bunch of artifacts, use Time Sieve to take extra turns, Imri to loop Time Sieve. Alright, so I am going to get like a little bit greedy here. I should probably just pass the turn and hold up Counterspell and like plan on drowning the locking at the end of their turn. But I decided to just counter, or decided to just drown and lock the Shredder now, just like stop the little extra value. And they come in and play this Imri on me that I have no answer to right now. So I will admit that my line, I think, was suboptimal here. The cookbook I could counter, but I really want to Archmage's Charm, draw a couple to try to find answers for some of the stuff that they've got going on. I just feel like if I'm spending every turn countering cookbook and they can replay it, but I can't actually deal with the Imri, then that's a losing battle for me. But here they're down to 2 cards. I know one of them's an Oval Chase Daredevil, so I just need to find like Fatal Pushes or something here. I do end up finding a Fatal Push. And maybe... Oh. Alright, so let's see what they got going on. Taken Unearth, which means their last card is Overchase Daredevil. But I've got this Imri answer now. Asmo's like gonna be able to attack here, which is frustrating. But at the end of the day, like my opponent attacking me with a 3/3 Asmo is not them killing me with Time Sieve. So we just need to find like a Murktide, a Shadow, something. Something that's not a Murktide. Alright. So if we don't find a Shadow, like we're pretty dead here. Get to rip another Time Sieve. So we've got backup Asmo and a Daredevil. Opponent goes through their cat oven combo of End of turn, sack, get back, sack, get back. Find another Urza Saga, which is pretty annoying for me. I do have another copy of Dress Down in the main, but... Archmage's Charm's a decent one. Alright, so here we've got Michael's, I wouldn't really call punt, more just like not having options. Yeah, actually I'm not going to call it a punt at all. So we have to steal the Asmo so that they can't, you know, kill us here. Emery's okay. I thought about counterspelling the Emery, but at the end of the day, I decided I wanted to counterspell this second Asmo more. So at least now, like, they can't get my Murktide region off the board. So this is like the punt that I don't know if it's actually a punt. I decided to attack in with the Asmo. I forgot that they had the extra mana to activate this Urza Saga. So they can just make like a ridiculously big construct here. I gain a little bit of life, but they get back Shadow Spear. If they didn't know that they could re-equip the Shadow Spear, then it would have been better for me to just play out the Murktide and pass the turn. That way I could like hold up my counter spells. I've got a Murktide. Maybe I chump block the construct token, gain a little life. I've got like a big flyer. I don't think I win it, but I'm in a little bit better shape. I was like, I get to block this with something that's not Murktide. But if they know that they can re-equip Shadow Spear, then it's kind of all for naught. Alright, so sideboarding against the Asmo food deck here. I ended up boarding out like some Street Wraiths and Inquisitions, and the Stubborn Annals. I decided on the Stubborn Annals because the game's going long, but it's their creatures that are accumulating value. So if I'm not answering the creatures, then it doesn't really matter what I do about the rest of the deck. So because their main threats are like Asmo, Emery's just going to be able to recast something every single turn. Urza's Saga. If I'm not answering those, then I'm losing that match. So the Stubborn Annals just like don't answer any of those. The Inquisitions are more because kind of along the same lines, like the stuff I'm losing to, they can just get down really early. I don't want to be drawing these Inquisitions late. I want to be drawing like interaction. The fourth Murktide Regent I cut because they had main deck Nihil Spellbomb. And anytime they have Spellbomb with like a bunch of tutor effects, I want to cut a Murktide because it's just less likely I'm going to have the graveyard active. Boarded in the 2 copies of Engineered Explosives. Boarded in the 2 copies of Spreading Seas for Urza's Saga. And then I did not board in the Blood Chief's Thirst because it would take 4 mana to answer an Emery. And I just thought that that was not as efficient as I would like to be. I'd rather have like Dress Downs, the full 4 copies, and the Spreading Seas for Urza's Saga. And the 4 Fatal Push for Asmo and Emery. And kind of go from there. So, on the play. Oops. Let's go back so we can take a look at that opening hand. Come on. Alright. Opening hand. 1 land. We've got a Dress Down. But we're on the play, no draw spell, no like Street Wraith or anything. So this is a pretty easy mulligan. Like, it's that stereotypical, if you could guarantee me the second land was on top, this hand would be a snap keep, but you can't, so second hand, Drown the Lock. We've got a 1-mana removal spell, so it makes this a little bit better, and it just kind of depends on if I want to go down to 5 cards or not. I don't really want to go down that much, so I'm just going to ditch back a Drown and see what happens. Like, I'm mainly keeping this hand over the first one because I have 1-mana interaction. So I can kill like an Imri or an Asmo or something before they're able to get out of hand. So, looking for lands. Dang. On the bright side, we've got an Asmo covered. If one of their cards was an Oval Chase Daredevil, it's not the worst thing in the world for me here. But they don't discard into turn, which makes me think that all 5 of their cards, now 6 of their cards, are live. Which obviously is not great for me, but... Alright, so we will just go ahead and kill this Shredder. Ledger Shredder has not impressed me terribly much. I think the card's decent, but I don't think it's like a slam dunk by any means. Alright, important turn here. I can pass the turn with Drown in the Lock or Dress Down or something like that, but there's such a high probability that my opponent is going to play third land and pass because they have the Urza's Saga. So, if I think my opponent is going to play land and pass, then my Drown in the Lock and my Dress Down are both dead cards here. So I can just spend my main phase casting my Night's Whisper, get a couple cards, try to find some more lands, and take advantage of my opponent like time walking themselves by not doing anything. So decide to go for that, get some good hits, and now I can go like third land, Thoughtseize, Dress Down the Construct tokens, and yeah, just like I thought, opponent just plays third land and passes. So now we've got a chance to regain a little bit of momentum here. We will take the second Ledger Shredder. So they got Bone Shards and a couple lands. We've got this Dress Down to deal with the Construct tokens. Yep. So I decided to go ahead and Dress Down before they get to search off Urza's Saga. Like, I don't really want them being able to get a Springleaf Drum and like have access to 2 mana that they wouldn't have otherwise. Spellbomb's fine. Like, they'll be able to Spellbomb away my yard for Murktide, but it's not the biggest deal in the world. I've got a bunch of counter magic now, so I can kind of fight over whatever's going on. And I would much rather them Spellbomb me and take me off Murktide than Spellbomb themselves and take them off these double Drown in the Lock. So, as soon as they ditch an Asmo, that's like guaranteed to have a second Asmo. Which I could have Drown in the Lock the Asmo, but I want to save this Drown for a what's it called? The Bone Shards. There's like several lines here that we could take, and I don't think any of them are like bad. Like, I could Drown in the Lock the Asmo when they cast it. That way they've got to just Bone Shards my Shadow. I've got kind of shields down, so I can't do anything about it. But at the end, like, I kind of decide, okay, I'll wait with the Shadow. Now we're at a point where they can make another food off the Asmo and have the Shadow deal 6 to itself. So if that's the case, like, I'm just going to draw. I know what they've got available to them. They've got the ability to kill my Shadow. I think I'm going to have to win this game with Murktide Regent, so let's just play to that. This is just to go ahead and make them use their resources, like make them make the extra food, kill the Shadow. It's going to happen, so might as well just get it over with. But there's a point there where, like, I could have drowned and locked the Asmo with the second cookbook on the stack. I could have countered the Asmo when it came down. But I think I want to save my counter spells for slightly more important things. Kind of like that, countering an Emery. So, Soul Guide's not the worst. They don't have a Daredevil going on right now, so it's not like the most important thing in the world. But I do know they have bone shards that they would probably like to kill a Murktide Regent with. And this is a rough spot, because, like, I don't want them to have this Academy manufacturer, or manufactor, because I don't want them to be able to discard the cookbook, make a food, a treasure, and a clue. So I feel like that's just going to be too much value for me to have to overcome. And, like, they're going to get to kill my Murktide here, but I just have to deal with that manufactor. So exile that so they can't get it back with Underworld Cookbook. They've got double Asmo already, so there's not really a point in, like, targeting that. I've got Archmage's Charm to draw 2 here. No point in stealing a cookbook because they can just respond with sacking it to get back an Asmo and, like, force me to crack the Soul Guide. Well, Spreading Seas, the land that's different, because we all know when things are different, that's scary. And all right, so this was kind of a fun sequence of turns here. My opponent's going to get back the Asmo with the cookbook. I decided to let it happen instead of sacking the Soul Guide because I can dress down the Asmo when they cast it. So they can't go get another cookbook. And I get to draw a card. So now I can just, like, Fatal Push this Asmo, and I've still got the Soul Guide Lantern if I want to sack it on the next one. So, like, I get to keep the Soul Guide Lantern plan for a later turn, but I also just get to get Asmo off the field and not let them get another cookbook. And here I kind of decide, like, going down to 1 just doesn't matter. Like, what's the difference between 5 and 1 against the deck that's relying on, like, sorcery speed threats that have to stick around for a turn to kill me? I could pop the Soul Guide and deal with the Overchased Daredevil, but I really want to use this this Soul Guide to draw a card. So counter that so that they don't get to do anything this turn. And then this is kind of like the, alright, I want to draw a card turn. Like, I need a threat at the end of the day. Now I've got EE, so I can deal with the cookbook. So now they can't get back the Oval Chase Daredevil unless they find an artifact to play. which is entirely possible. But like, I'm going shields down this turn, which means they can draw something live to be able to get back, like the Daredevil, or to put pressure on the board. But I've got the Brazen Borrower to petty theft a creature. They've got a lot of dead draws. Unfortunately, Mishra's Bauble is actually live here because of the Daredevil. So you're just going to play him out. Alright. So we need a threat in the worst way possible. But at the very least, we can like petty theft the Daredevil, play out the Brazen Borrower, have something to do. So let's do that. And I could counter the Daredevil on the way back down, but ultimately I've got this Drown in the Loch that can be a removal spell. So that lets me have the end of turn to get the Brazen Borrower down. It's like I can always untap and kill the Daredevil. I don't have to counter it on the way down. But being at 1 life means I need to find a dude. And I'm not playing around any sort of counter spell here. They haven't shown me any this game or last game, so I don't feel a huge need to like respect it. If they had shown me counter spells at some point, I'd probably be a little more likely to consider them. I might not play around them, but at least take them into account. Alright, so Time Sieve, I don't care about. It gets back the Oval Chase, which is a little annoying, but I don't actually care about the Time Sieve itself. They're so far off of that being relevant. I do care about this Academy Manufactor. And finally, we have a legitimate businessman. I mean, 1 mana Death Shadow. Alright. So this is where we start getting into like Abyss mode. Like, this Daredevil is just on chump block duty. Obviously, it's a returnable chump blocker, but at the end of the day, it's just chump blocking. It's not killing me. And now that I've picked up this counter spell. So, I started thinking about this Unearth. Yes, before anybody gets concerned, I'm like 100% counter spelling this. But I'm more just curious about what all this Unearth represents. Like, Unearth the Manufacturer, that triggers the Daredevil. They get that back. They can cast the Daredevil. So now they've got 2 attackers. My Brazen Borrower can't block either of them. So, like, just seeing the Unearth on the Manufacturer was like, oh yeah, they've got a 3 or less drop in graveyard that they can get. They could also Unearth the Asmo, get another cookbook. But I don't think they couldn't ditch and have a land. Wonder how many artifacts that would get them. So they Unearth Asmo, get a cookbook, ditch a car, that's 4. Get back Daredevil. Or no, they could go Unearth Asmo, get the cookbook, play the cookbook, that triggers the Daredevil, discard the Daredevil, make a food, that triggers the Daredevil, and then they'd have 1 card in hand. If their last card was a land, they could play out the Daredevil and have Daredevil, Asmo, 2 food, Time Sieve, and cookbook. They could kill the Borrower, chump block the Shadow. That wouldn't be too bad. But either way, we're on to game 3. Alright. Game 3, opening hand. Double Fatal Push, Shadow, Drown. It's about all I can ask for. I've got removal spells for the early dudes. For Asmo, Emery, whatever. I've got a threat. Drown for a little bit of protection. I think we draw into hand disruption here. Yep. So, important to note, we're going to play this Thoughtseize off one of the Watery Graves. Usually when you think of like life total loss, you think of, alright, well if I fetch Shock to 17, Thoughtseize to 15, and top deck another fetch land, I can go to 12 and play Shadow. But because I know they have the card Emery in their deck, I really want to keep Revolt available for these fatal pushes. So we're going to lead on the Watery Grave and Thoughtseize. We see double Asmo, Bone Shards, Polluted Delta. So because we have the fatal push for the Asmo, it's not the scariest hand in the world. Like, they can get a second cookbook going, but making a whole bunch of food isn't killing me. But we immediately get rewarded for our not using Flooded Strand line. So now we just get to like double fatal push. So just remember, you can make great choices if you don't throw away all of your options on turn 1 for potential high upside. Like, them having a bunch of food is fine. I'm answering their Urza Saga here, which, by the way, their 2 blind draws have been Emery and Urza Saga. Pretty solid blind draws. But at the end of the day, like, we've got shadows. So I'm going to let them Bone Shards this shadow if they want to. And they're going to make 100 billion food. Yet again, I don't care about their 100 billion food because these aren't killing me. Like, annoying, sure. Killing me, no. But me not being able to end the game could kill me. So, we're going to play Protect the Shadow. But their draws have been pretty fire here. Drowning the Lock's amazing. So all I'm really looking for is like second Shadow or Murktide Regent, Street Wraith, like anything that lets me outpace them drawing or gaining 3 off of food each turn. So them not finding 3rd and 4th land is really nice. And Dismember should do it. So, like, I think after last turn they had ditched a second Daredevil, so I know 2 of their 3 cards are Daredevils. They're pretty incentivized to just, like, gain 3 life every turn. But after this turn, I'll be able to dismember my own Shadow. That'll get me up, or get me down on life low enough to be able to attack through them gaining 3 off this food. Decide just to Drown and Lock the Spell Bomb because, like, maybe they have something else. At the moment, I know their last 2 cards are 2 Oval Chase Daredevils, and I know they can't beat me if I just, like, dismember my Shadow here. So, why not just counter the unknown variable? So, there we go. Dismember our own Shadow. Gets down bigger than their life total after they eat a food. And we draw the Murktide right on time as always. That's match number 2. Match number 3. It's kind of funny that this voiceover league is going to take like right at about the same amount of time as the actual league. But, oh well. Okay. So opening hand, no lands, threw it back. Second hand, hand's pretty solid. We're on the play. We've got turn 1 Thoughtseize, turn 2 Shadow if we want, turn 3 like Night's Whisper or Archmage's Charm. So we're just going to throw back this Watery Grave. It doesn't help us cast a Shadow on turn 2. Which we don't know if a turn 2 Shadow is great, but at least having the option is nice. So Counterspell, Ledger Shredder, Murktide Regent, Ragavan, so it's blue-red Murktide. I could take the Murktide Regent is the scariest card in their hand. Ledger Shredder solid because I don't have an answer to it. It gets down under Archmage's Charm. Can't steal it. Counterspell's pretty annoying, but I'm going to be able to get down a Shadow under that if I want to. And then Ragavan is like premier 1-drop in the format that can attack into my turn 2 Shadow. So I'm going to take the Ragavan. Mainly because I want to get down this Shadow on turn 2. They don't have a removal spell. They don't have a draw spell. So there's at least an okay chance that this turn 2 Shadow lives. And if they do something like cast Ledger Shredder here, then I get to just like start attacking into it. Because at the end of the day, like Ledger Shredder is probably not going to deal enough damage to me to kill me. So them ditching Iteration means like second card is almost guaranteed Iteration. Because you're not going to ditch that card in this spot. So I had to do a little bit of math here. Let's minimize this slightly. So if I take the Iteration, I go down to 5. Shadow goes up to an 8/8. I can attack. If they attack back, then I'm presenting lethal the turn after, so they have to chump block if they play out a Murktide. Because like they would attack back, put me down to 3. Shadow would be a 10/10. I could Thoughtseize them, go to 1, swing in. They have to block with Murktide. I drown and lock the Ledger Shredder. Hope for no bolt. But if I take the Expressive Iteration and attack and they block with the Ledger Shredder, then they can play out their Fetch Land or the Steam Vents, either one, and play out a 5/5 Murktide, and I'm at 5 life. I can't Drown and Lock it. I can't Archmage's Charm it. And I can't attack through for lethal in 1 turn. So Expressive Iteration is like the card I want to take so bad here. But I can't because I will just die to them hard casting the Murktide next turn if I do that. So I end up taking, I believe, the Murktide itself. Start attacking because at the same time, if they attack back, then I've got Thoughtseize plus Hold Up, Drown in the Lock, and I can kill them. Iteration here is not the worst thing in the world. They can't find an Unholy Heat to kill my Shadow. They can find a Lightning Bolt, but thankfully they do not. Now it's Thoughtseize to make sure the coast is clear. End up taking the Archmage's Charm because if for some reason I don't kill them right here, then Archmage's Charm is like the best card against me because it just takes my Shadow when I'm tapped out. And then this does give them a Ledger Shredder trigger, so they have 1 draw step off this Shredder to find a Lightning Bolt. If they don't find it, I win. If they do find it, I lose. But once we're at this point, like, I might as well go for it because either they have the Lightning Bolt or not. If they have the Lightning Bolt, it doesn't matter if I have the Street Wraith or not. Like, I'm tapped out. I'm at 3 life. But they get Basic Island, so we know we're safe. And that is game 1. So far in these games, I've played against Ledger Shredder twice, and it has not looked particularly good. Alright, so hand has 4 lands, which is a bit much, but I do have an answer to Murktide, as well as an answer to a 1-drop creature. Just if they have a 1-drop creature, I would much rather it be a Dragon's Rage Channeler than a Ragavan. And opponent plays the whole bauble before my Channeler. 5th land, not really where I want to be. So let's go ahead and start developing our mana a little bit. It's not really a big reason to shock aggressively. Like, they've got to deal damage to me, so... And I decide to drown in response to this fetch. I could have passed and played around Spell Pierce. Or I couldn't have played around Spell Pierce. I could have passed and just, like... I guess done this on their upkeep to try to kill some mana. But I figured Counterspell was way more likely than Spell Pierce. They might have, like, 2 copies of Spell Pierce or something. But I know they're on 4 Counterspell, so I'm going to try to take care of that one instead. So they're just going to draw cards. That's fine. What did they... I don't even know if Spiral Bluff was what they exiled to Expressive Iteration. But either way, like, we're on this draw-go train. I decided just to flash in the Brazen Borrower. Like, if they had a Murktide, they would have played it by now. And if they had a Murktide backed up by Counterspell, then the Brazen Borrower is probably not doing a whole lot anyway. So, we'll just, like, go ahead and try to put some sort of pressure on them with the Borrower. And then this is just life total management. Like, I'm trying to get to a point where Unholy Heat isn't killing me, or isn't killing my shadows. Opponent's not really doing anything, so I'm assuming their hand is just like heats and bolts and... Decide I'm going to fight over an iteration. And here we're just going with the triple shadow. Like, I'm assuming my opponent has got answers for all 3 of these shadows, but I have drawn, what, 5 lands, 4 lands? So if I'm not casting a shadow, like, I'm just not doing anything. So expecting the big bad Murktide itself. Alright. We get a little Murktide ourselves. I should not have played out that land there. It doesn't actually grab anything, and it means that I can't bluff. So, that was a pretty bad one on my part. Yep. So here it's just like attack with Murktide. I can't kill you on the crackback. But they don't attack with Murktide. So that gives me a chance to draw something relevant. This is kind of a funny back and forth. Like, I draw Dismember, which is really awesome and really terrifying. It means I can attack if I want to. And, like, if they block with, say, Murktide on Shadow, I could dismember the Murktide and keep my Shadow alive. If they block, like, Ragavan and Darcy on Shadow, then I can dismember something. This Darcy has to attack next turn. So I decide, yeah, why not? Like, if I'm not attacking, I can't block, so why not try to make something happen? They take it, go down to 12, which is relevant because now like a shadow can theoretically kill. So attack with the Darcy and the Murktide. And we decided to just full cast on this Darcy. Mainly to go down to 1 life so that if I find a removal spell and they've got nothing, I can kill them. And survey says not a removal spell. So we'll see that comes up a couple times here. It's just like, and I wanted to Thoughtseize for the information. I was dead to the Murktide Regent, so I just wanted to see what was going on. And they had a Spell Pierce, so they did actually have nothing there, which was kind of funny. Usually you think about like, oh, if my opponent has nothing, I can do something relevant here. But it's never actually them having legitimate nothing. So, pretty good opening hand. We got a threat. We've got an answer to a 1-drop. Maybe we steal a 1-drop. Who knows? And then them putting Bauble in the yard for us is huge. It's like now I know Drowning Lock's going to be live on a 1-drop. But we're going to play a little draw go. If our opponent wants to play draw go, we'll kind of oblige. And then playing Ragavan on turn 2, there's a likelihood that they just drew the Ragavan, but then why wouldn't you dash it? So I'm assuming this is Ragavan backed up by Spell Pierce. So what I'm going to do is make them use the Spell Pierce, because that means I can untap an Archmage's Charm and just steal the Ragavan. My Ragavan. They could have like 3rd land Murktide there, but it would just be like a 3/3 Murktide. So Unholy Heat, you got it. Oh. Alright, so their hand was Murktide, Engineered Explosive, Spell Pierce. EE is their only answer to Shadow. But the Murktide's like the big scary dude. I could take the EE or take the Spell Pierce and plan on counterspelling Murktide. But the problem with that is if they just draw another Spell Pierce or choose not to play the Murktide, I'm kind of SOL there. And they end up taking the trade on Spell Pierce to get the EE down, which is fine because like I can Archmage's Charm to take the EE. I could draw a Murktide Regent of my own and not care about it. Whole bunch of options there. Night's Whisper is like a decent draw. I could have been mana efficient there and just like played out the Shadow, but I'm thinking I'm in a position where I might be able to like Petty Theft the EE, like draw 4th land, Petty Theft the EE, play out Shadow with Stubborn Denial backup. But they draw Expressive Iteration on my turn that I tap down here, which is pretty rough. Like drawing Iteration on the Shields down turn, especially like this point of the game, is kind of backbreaking. But if they're just finding Bauble off of it, like I'm pretty happy with that trade. So now I'm like terrified of the extra card that they put in hand off Expressive Iteration. So I'm just going to kind of like let them crack this EE. If they didn't have the expressive iteration last turn and just like passed, then I'm way more likely to go for the bounce EE plan. But I feel like right here I've got good answers to everything they can do. I just need to like live. So we're kind of relying on the second threat we find being the relevant one, which happens a lot in this league. Like, we look at a hand of, all right, I know you're going to be able to answer Murktide or Shadow or whatever. I'm going to rely on the second one being good enough. All right, so we do find some decent interaction here. We can get down Murktide, hold up Counterspell or Drown in the Lock. Using Drown in the Lock here in case they find like back-to-back Murktides or something and Drown becomes dead. They've got 18 cards in their yard, so like Drown in the Lock could kill a Murktide pretty easily, but might as well just like keep the safer option. Maybe they find like Relic of Progenitus into Murktide, and we feel really bad for having Drown in the Lock in hand. But here they've got 2 cards. We've got 2 counter spells. We're just going to like counter anything they could possibly put on the stack. We could also just let the Mystical Dispute resolve. They get their Ledger Shredder, we E for 2, or Petty Theft, or whatever. Doesn't matter too much. But that is match number 3. Match number 4. Against another Mike. Good strong name. I like it. So, on the play, have a land, have a Wraith, have a Thoughtseize, have a Shadow. That's like all you can ask for out of Death Shadow decks, right? So, pretty easy keep. I'm not cycling the Wraith first because I don't know if I want to cycle the Wraith. Like, if I end up being against a Lightning Bolt deck, I really don't want to get too aggressive with my life total. Alright. This matchup's probably pretty rough. The Liliana of the Veil deck that's also running Dolthy in the main and Angrath's Rampage. So, it's going to take a little finagling. Best card in their hand, I think, is Liliana of the Veil. They're a little ways off of Kroxa. I've got Ragavan and Dolthy covered by Fatal Pushes. So, I'm going to take the Liliana. You could make an argument for taking the Angrath's Rampage if they don't find the third land. But at the end of the day, like, the Angrath's Rampage isn't live until I decide it's live. Like, it's not a relevant card until I decide to put a creature onto the battlefield. Finding second land is nice. I'll get to kill the Ragavan. We've got another Fatal Push for the Dolthy. And I make an important discovery here. This is Jund. I thought this was Rakdos. Jund is better for me because like cards like Tarmogoyf and Wrenn and 6 are worse in the matchup than just like more live removal spells. So I play Kroxa, I cycle Street Wraith to see what I draw into because it might inform my decision a little bit more. And ultimately decide to pitch this Charm. Like, Archmage's Charm is really good in the matchup. It's card advantage, it's a counter spell. I could steal a Ragavan, something like that. But if I just ditch the Charm, then like the rest of my hand lines up reasonably well. Because now I've got, like, Inquisition to take the Ingrath's rampage. I've got Shadows at the red. I've got Fatal Push to deal with their Dolphy. So I don't just feel, like, bad about that. Until they have another removal spell. But their removal spell comes partnered with a copy of Basic Forest. Which, if you're unaware, Basic Forest and Kroxa, Titan of Death's Hunger, not really best friends. And this is coming from somebody who has played the two cards together. So, play out Shadow because I know they're going to be able to answer it, but I figure if they play the Dolphy instead, I can at least get like a decent attack in. So now we've got the Dolphy. I decide I'm just going to dress down here, draw an extra card. I get rid of the Dolphy's exile ability so I can like fetch afterwards and Fatal Push and blah 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 blah. Be mana efficient. But here we're just looking for like a Murktide, a Street Wraith, or not Street Wraith, a Murktide, a Shadow, something like that. Decide to main phase draw 2 here for 2 reasons. One, I really want to find like a Shadow that I can play out right here. So if I pass the turn, just like plan on counterspelling, then I don't think that's winning me the game. Like playing a counterspell into potential Kroxa at some point, or like another live threat, whatever. I just don't think it's doing what I want it to do. And second reason, like, if they do something like Dash or Ragavan, then that counterspell or that, like, gain control, whatever, is awful. So it's like, 1, I want to find a Shadow. 2, counterspell is just like a bad mode right now. But I do find Murktide into Stubborn Denial, which is a pretty nice combination. So now I get real good threat down. So Lightning Bolt me there makes me assume that this last card, or one of these last 2 cards, is another Lightning Bolt. Not another Lightning Bolt. Not another Lightning Bolt at all. Thankfully, we've got an answer to it. So, and then draw backup counterspell. Like, this counterspell right here is so huge, I can't even begin to describe. Not only does it let me time walk my opponent's next play, just like counter whatever they put on the stack, it also means that this Murktide is putting them down to 1 next turn, and 1 means that any fetch land does not let them work on getting Kroxa back. Any fetch land. So having the counterspell to deal with whatever they do this turn means like Kroxa is just off the table as a potential out. So obviously I can't deal with an escape Kroxa because it's just going to dome me for 3. But here it's just like, hey, hope you don't have a bolt. Hope you don't have an answer to Murktide. This is all I got. And they do not have the bolt, nor do they have the answer to Murktide. So let's go to game 2. Sideboarding against Jund. Board out the extra dress downs. If they went Jund for Maelstrom Pulse, then it might just be like 4 removal spells. And in which case, dress down's not that great. Like, I don't want to dress down a Kroxa, dress down a Dolphy, doesn't really matter. Same thing with the Ragavan. They didn't look like an Urza Saga deck. I didn't see Saga or Wrenn and 6 or Unholy Heat, any of those things. Board out some Street Wraiths and an Inquisition. I don't want to be too hyper aggressive with my life total when they've got, like I said, Ragavan, Dalthy, Kroxa, all that stuff. And hand disruption mirrors, like, you don't want to be the person drawing hand disruption late, but they've got so many really impactful targets early on that I want to see some amount of hand disruption. I just don't want to be drawing it on like turn 7, 8, 9, whatever. Board ends, I brought in a couple copies of Soul Guide Lantern because I saw Kroxa and that card's really, really difficult to deal with. We boarded in the 2 Spreading Seas because the greedy Jund mana base with Kroxa, like if you can delay a Liliana of the Veil, a Kroxa Escape, anything like that, then like it's pretty relevant. And Spreading Seas against like these high pip requirement decks can often just shut down the land and draw a card. So almost like strip mine plus draw a card. What else did I board in? Boarded in the Blood Chief's Thirst because we saw a whole bunch of aggressive dudes. And I boarded in the last Stubborn Denial. So there's like, this is that iffy point in sideboarding. Stubborn Denial is okay. It's not great. But once your opponent starts showing you a critical mass of like Fatal Push, Angrath's Rampage, Liliana of the Veil, Maelstrom Pulse, Kolaghan's Command, like of these really obnoxiously good spells in the matchup, then Stubborn Denial stock just like starts going up and up and up and up and up. So that's where I like diverge a little bit from a typical sideboard guide here. Alright, so opening hand is just like, alright, I've got lands, I've got an answer to something, I've got threats, I've got ways to lower my life total and draw power, so let's roll with it. Spellbomb's a decent one. Spellbomb's really good when you draw back-to-back Murktides. But interesting hand. So they cannot currently cast Dalthy or Riveteer's Charm. I don't care about the Bolt. I've got the Dalthy answered if they draw a fetch land. But they could like spellbomb themselves, so it's a little bit iffy. So I believe I end up taking the Veil of Summer here. If they want to like end of turn Riveteer's Charm, that's fine. If they want to play out Dalthy, like we'll force the Spellbomb activation if they want to keep it around. But not Riveteer's Charm, Veil of Summer is just like the card that if I let them keep this in hand, it makes so many of my future lines almost like negligible. Alright, so they do find Tarmogoyf, which is nice to know about. Alright, a little bit of kind of a punt there. I should have just gotten basic island. It was like I knew I was going to drown in the lock this Tarmogoyf. I wasn't going to play out a shadow. So if my plan is to drown in the lock, I should just get basic island because I know that if they spellbomb themselves, I'm going to be taking a hit off this Tarmogoyf, and I know they have Lightning Bolt. So right now, if I go like drown in the lock the Tarmogoyf, they spellbomb themselves, I'm putting instant back into the yard, so this Tarmogoyf isn't shrinking. It's going to hit me for 4 down to 6. Next turn, I can like play out a shadow, but if they just find a second copy of Lightning Bolt, like I'm just dead. But I could have I could have taken 1, gone to 12, taken this 4, gone to 8, played out a Shadow or Murktide or whatever, and not been just like dead to second bolt. So, but now I figured like I'm dead to second bolt anyway. Might as well play into it. I was not thinking about Renin 6 here, which is probably oversight as well. Because they could have just gone like, end of turn, bolt me, untap Renin 6. And I'd have been, you know, not alive. This is always like the play style argument. I'm not casting Dismember here because of Veil of Summer. They've already shown me the card. And like my fear is I cast Dismember. They Veil of Summer. Now they get to chump block. They get a draw off Veil. And they get a draw for turn. So if in some number of those cards they find another Lightning Bolt, like I'm just dead. If I don't Dismember here, then they have to naturally draw the Lightning Bolt in one less draw. But they just find another Tarmogoyf, so I get to Dismember this one when they're tapped out. So it's just a case of like, I think I can afford to play around Veil of Summer right there because I give them one less draw at finding another Lightning Bolt. And I've got anything that's not exactly Lightning Bolt Veil of Summer covered. So maybe it's wrong. Like maybe I should just go ahead and Dismember the Tarmogoyf and like go for lethal right there. But I felt like it was a little bit, tiny little bit safer to just attack, force the chump block, and go to the next turn. Let's see. Is this the same one? No, this is round 5. Alright, so keep a hand of like Double Shadow, Stub, Archmage's Charm on the play. Opponent reveals double Chancellor of the Tangle. So, for anybody that's played like Grixis Shadow a lot, Neobrand or Neoform, Grishelbrand, whatever you want to call the deck, has historically been like about as close to a buy as you can get for traditional Grixis Shadow. Like 4 Gurmag Angler, 4 Shadow, 4 Thoughtseize, 4 Street Wraith, 4 Stubborn Denial, Snapcaster Mages, Drown in the Locks, like that kind of Shadow deck. This is not that kind of Shadow deck. So we have to take everything with like a little bit of a grain of salt. Them also having double Chancellor means if they just start off like land, Allosaurus Rider, Neoform, they can pay for Stubborn Denial. But they start off with an Abundant Harvest, which means I don't think I'm dead on turn 1, because now if they Allosaurus Rider and go for a Neoform, I can soft stub the Neoform. So I don't know if they were playing around Neoform or they just really like missing a piece here. But they do not go for the turn 1, which means I'm pretty safe on turn 2 as well. So not going for it on turn 2 kind of leads me to believe that they've got Eldritch Evolution instead of Neoform. So I can still answer that on turn 3. I could play out a Shadow here, but I really want to like not let whatever their payoff is resolve here. So I'm going to sit on Archmage's Charm instead, so that I can get down like a stub-enabled Death Shadow next turn. Because if I just play out double Shadow or something and hold up soft stub, and they just go like 4th land, Allosaurus Rider, Eldritch Evolution, and I can't counter it. That feels really, really bad when I've got the counter in hand and just like chose to be overly aggressive. But like now I've got soft stub up or hard stub up. I don't need to hold up double counter spells. Like even if I played out one shadow, the only difference is I'm holding up Archmage's Charm instead of Stubborn Denial. I'm not holding up both of them. So if I can only cast one counter spell anyway, I might as well get like double shadow down and be able to hold up both of them. This is an end of turn Street Wraith, which I am 99.999% adamantly against. Because I'm not accomplishing anything with this Street Wraith, right? There's nothing I can draw into that I would cast into turn. I guess technically Dress Down I could, but if I have a Dress Down on top, then I'm just like drawing into it on my turn anyway. But my thought process here was I'm trying to bait a concession. Like, if I cycle this Street Wraith and my opponent thinks I've got fetch for a shock next turn, then they might just concede right here, and I don't have to back them into a corner. Because we've seen matches against like Storm before where you back them into a corner, you show that you're not presenting lethal this turn, but you're presenting it next turn, so they have to go for it, and they just like pull something out of a hat. So this Street Wraith is more just like hoping that they'll just scoop it up right there, which of course they don't. But we'll be able to get an attack in, and now it's like they have to go for it right here. So when they pass, a little bit confused, so I'm just assuming like Nourishing Shoals shenanigans. I can Inquisition here because I can still hold up like Counterspell stub or Archmage's Charm stub. So there's one Nourishing Shoal. Main deck Veil of Summer. And I see that they just have like nothing. They never found a way to get an Allosaurus Rider. Yeah, Allosaurus Rider, not Allosaurus Shepherd. So double Shoal buys them one turn because I'm still hitting in for 14, so it's still a 2-turn clock. And I've just got counter spells for whatever they do turn 2. Or that next turn, turn 6, yeah. Turn 6 against Griselbrand's a weird thing to think about. So yeah, that's game 1. Let's go to game number 2. Sideboarding against Griselbrand. Board out removal, board in counter spells, like the Stubborn Denials, the Mystical Disputes are both coming in. And then I boarded in the 2 copies of Chalice of the Void, mainly because I've seen Griselbrand with a few different win conditions. The Thrasta means that it's the one with the 1-mana green card that like target creature gets +X/+X, where X is the amount of life you've gained this turn or something. So they just play out like a big hasty Thrasta, give it like +30 and swing out. So I know that's how they're going to end up winning, but there's Griselbrand decks that play like Mox Amber to make black mana off their Griselbrand, and play like a what's the artifact? The one that Pentad Prism, something like that, to like filter the mana. So I figure I've got nothing else that I want to bring in, and I want to get all these removal spells out. So I'm just gonna bring in Chalice of the Void in case there's an outside chance that they're also playing Mox Amber. Alright, so opening hand's horrible. no interaction of any sort. 6 is okay. I would prefer to have like Stubborn Denial or actual counter spell to Archmage's Charm, but I don't really want to keep mulling too aggressively, especially when I have Hand Disruption, Threat, ways to lower my life total, lands, redraws. Like, I've got most of the pieces that I need. The opponent mulled to 5, so the thought here is like, alright, if they're mulling aggressively looking for Leyline, then this Inquisition could be pretty rough. And Speak of the Devil. But the flip side of that is if they mull too aggressively to Leyline, there's a reasonable chance that they just like don't have a good functional hand. So like they've got 3 cards left. If their 3 cards are second land, green card, Allosaurus Rider, and they top deck a Neo form, like, yeah, they got it. Nothing I can do about it. Before I forget, decided to fetch Shock there, cycle the Street Wraith on turn 1. In case I found like another copy of Inquisition or Thoughtseize, I could just target myself and ditch this other Inquisition, help grow my Murktide. Like, I'm not holding up anything, so there's not a huge reason to like bluff it. The likelihood is so low that their hand is like absolutely perfect to kill me here that I don't really mind like showing them what I've got and playing the odds game. But like now I get to start holding up Archmage's Charm, so I feel not great but relatively okay. That actually reminds me, I need to look up Entity Allosaurus Rider. I wanted to check last night when I was playing this league if how Allosaurus Rider's power and toughness were defined. So like Dress Down would make it a 1/1, but it wouldn't kill it, which is relevant. If it killed it, then I would love Dress Down, but mainly I just kept these in because I could like Dress Down in response to a Neo form or something and stop Gristlebrand from drawing a bunch of cards that turn. Because like I don't really care if they draw a bunch of cards on my turn, because that means like I get to play stuff, but if they draw a bunch of cards on their turn, then I'm probably dead. Alright, so let's get down our big 3/3 Murktide. I made like a whole joke about this last night. Like, oh, this is the Murktide Regent that every other Murktide aspires to be. Like, this is the belle of the ball Murktide. Summoner's Pact means they are more than likely going for it this turn. So, I've got options here. I could Archmage's Charm to counter the Eldritch Evolution, but if one of their 2 cards is like a Pact of Negation, then I just lose the game. I could Dress Down to try to stop a Grizzlebrand, but again, if they've got Pact of Negation, I lose. So I kind of decided like all my options are almost the same thing, and I just want to see how Dress Down works here. So I decided to go for the Dress Down. Like, is the Archmage's Charm the optimal play? Probably. But my thought process here is, alright, if my opponent does have a counter spell of some sort, a Pact of Negation, then I would rather keep my Archmage's Charm and get rid of the Dress Down. If for some reason I don't die here. But if they're like drawing all their cards at instant speed, then this opens up the possibility. This was the other point. This is actually relevant. Briefly crossed my mind, so I want to bring it up. If they go to their turn, they have to pay for Pact. So the only way they can pay for Pact is to have some sort of like ritual effect on their upkeep, like Manamorphose Ritual or Manamorphose Angel's Grace, something like that. Drown in the Lock and Archmage's Charm gives me two chances at fighting over that on their upkeep. So maybe I can get them to just die to Pact. So my opponent spends his turn like, I think they play all 4 Nourishing Shoals here and draw all these cards down to 6 cards in library, 3 life. They have another Nourishing Shoal. And I don't know if this was a misclick or a miscount or what, but they just draw 7 more cards with 6 cards in their library and die. I think that they didn't have an answer to the Pact trigger, and so this was just them like going out on their own terms. I think. Like, I don't know for sure, but that's my guess here is like, because if they have Manamorphosed Ritual, something, I don't know, some combination of cards, then I would assume they have enough like Pact of Negations in their deck to fight over what I've got and still be able to win. But it also could be like they need to tap down too low to win. If they cast too many spells, then I can like Drown in the Lock the Griselbrand. And like Mox Amber might not do anything. I don't know. There's possibilities there. But my guess is just they didn't have a way to stop the Pact trigger from killing them. So yeah, that was the league there. Pretty fun one, if I do say so myself. This version of Death Shadow plays extraordinarily like 2017 Grixis, where it's, alright, I'm going to spend the first like 4 or 5 turns of the game just countering stuff, drawing cards, interacting with your board, and then eventually I'm going to like play down the threat with stub or counterspell backup and like stub your answer at the end of my turn, stub your answer on your turn, untap and kill you. Or it might be like untap, swing, counter another thing on your turn, and then untap and kill you. Something like that. Like you play more of that combo Protect the Queen style, except instead of having a combo of Shadow or Gurmag Angler and Battle Rage, your combo is Shadow or Murktide Regent and like 9 counter spells. And usually that's enough, like we saw in those games. So yeah, I think it's a pretty sweet deck. I think if you're wanting to play some Shadow, especially some Dimir Shadow, and you think Murktide's high up on your radar, then I think this is a very reasonable deck to try out. And I'll be looking forward to playing some more matches with it going forward. So, appreciate you checking out the league. Catch you live on stream at twitch.tv/the_control freak.